George R. R. Martin does fantasy, and A Song of Ice and Fire is fantasy, and Buffy is essentially a fantasy character. So there's a huge amount of overlap between the two. Although most of my essays are on Partially Examined Kubrick, this is kind of an exception, but this is more of a quickie instead of a full-blown video essay, so it's more of a work in progress. But I'm going to try to do my best because it is a fascinating issue, though perhaps even for Buffy fans or Game of Thrones fans, not a real controversy, although it has been noted. Essentially, the question here is who does magic worse or better? I'm only going to do minor spoilers for Game of Thrones seasons 1 to 4 and Buffy seasons 1 to 4. So if you want zero spoilers, don't listen. If you're okay with some spoilers, I'm still going to leave a lot of the story untold or untapped because we don't need to go through the whole story just to see what the point is. So what's happening or what's going on? Well, essentially in season 4 of Buffy, she faces an antagonist called Adam, who's kind of like cybernetic being who's extremely powerful and is much stronger, much tougher, and much more invulnerable than Buffy, quote, in normal mode. So she has to do something to gain more power to attack Adam. And what they pull off is essentially what's known as a binding spell. And it's unclear how it works, but basically she takes apparently the power of Xander, Willow, or Giles and becomes Super Buffy. And as Super Buffy, at least for a little bit, she has much more powers, much more extraordinary abilities, and she's able to destroy Adam. And there we are. And so seemingly there's no issue, but then she keeps facing other antagonists in the other seasons. Again, we don't have to get into details of who they are, but she does face, again, more powerful antagonists, but she never ever uses the spell again. Now, it's implied, well, they don't want to use the spell because it'll have certain effects on Buffy and her friends. But when you think it through, the answer is no, because the effect was neutralized. So even if there's a quote bad consequence from using the spell, they seem to have taken care of it. So they should be able to just use the spell all over again to fight a much more powerful antagonist, but they don't do so. So you're kind of like, well, why not? So that's Buffy. And again, the defense is, well, Buffy is always meant to be a lighthearted fantasy, right? It mixes horror, comedy, and other genres. You don't want to take it too seriously. Yes, there's a canon, but it's kind of loose. And we'll agree to disagree on that. I do think there is a canon, and we can measure it, not objectively, but, the canon provides enough solid ground to say certain controversies make sense, and certain controversies don't make sense. And now we get to early seasons of Game of Thrones, and it's technically a lot worse because Martin did set up a much more tight system in most places. But interestingly enough, magic is one of those places he's actually very weak on. And if you do pay attention to the books, it has a lot of problems. I'm only going to concentrate on one major issue, but if you think through his magic system, it really doesn't make any sense and it doesn't really work. But a lot of fans still think it's a lot better than other fantasy books, but technically speaking, magic is a very weak place in terms of his writing. So what's happening? Well, the obvious one is Melisandre. I think most people know what the issue is, but long story short is that Melisandre helps kill Renly, with Stannis becoming some kind of weird shadow creature and her giving birth to a shadow baby in season 2. And again, so far so good, nothing really stupid or crazy, but the way she does it is apparently using king's blood. She succeeds, Renly gets killed off, and all that, and then the question becomes like, okay, because this is an insane amount of power when you think about it, because you can raise an army, but Melisandre can just bypass that, saying, oh, I'm just going to do something to get around your army. So anyone is potentially vulnerable in this world due to her magic. So having this really incredible weapon and this incredible magic, you think Stannis wants to kill off all these rivals, including Joffrey, including the people in Dorne, including the Ironborn. You go through the list, like he can now neutralize any enemy. But Melisandre just says, oh, that was a one-time thing. You can't do that ever again. And now, of course, you're tempted to say, well, there you go. That's Dave and Dan writing at its finest. They're just stupid. They don't understand the books. They don't understand the lore. They don't understand George Martin. The problem is when you go back to the book, it does the same thing. It just says, well, can I use this magic again? And the answer is, no. That was a one-time thing. She gives no explanation, and she wants Stannis to live because she thinks he's the prophetized, Lord of the Light, blah, 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 Azor Ahai, yada, yada, yada. But she never really explains why she doesn't use the magic again. She just says, we can't do it again. And it's like, why not? We just can't. That was it. That was a one-time thing. We're done. I'm limited to that one time. And if I use it again, I would kill you. But there's no real logical story or narrative reason because you just need king blood. They can find king blood. So why isn't she going to do it again? She's just not. Now, of course, in fairness, we still have the story to be completed. So maybe George will do a last-minute explanation. But it's been about, I don't know, over 20 years. So clearly, he doesn't think this is a problem, or if it is a problem, most of the story doesn't care about it or doesn't address it. So if you have noticed, yeah, it's a big plot hole. It's as big as the Buffy issue, saying, okay, you have access to this spell and this magic that makes you incredibly powerful, but you're not going to use it. Yes, there's a consequence and a cost, but within the story, it seems to be explained. Like, Buffy will get a bad dream, but she'll become Super Buffy for a while. So, seems like a good trade off. Just like here, it's like, okay, you give up some king blood and you get a super powerful assassin. But we don't want to do that again. And it's like, okay, why? We're just not going to do it again. And that's it. So, although it's tempting to say D&D just messed it up, no, they seem to follow the books pretty closely on this. So, why no more Shadow Assassin? Why no more Super Buffy? I don't know. Super Buffy just retired. It just happened. Deal with it. So, yeah, at the end of the day, the way magic is handled in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, as incredible as it sounds, is really all not that different from Game of Thrones or even the books A Song of Ice and Fire. Now, there are creatures who are magical, who are more consistent, but in terms of the deep question, was magic handled better by George or Joss Whedon? The answer is, well, neither one of them seem to care about the details. They just pull off these things and then they happen. And then it's like, okay, what are the limits? Here are the limits. Why? No explanation. There just are limits, but we're not going to be told why there are limits. And there we are. So at least if you're more of a Whedon fan, I guess this actually makes him look pretty good, saying, well, he's just as lazy when it comes to magic. It's like, it's just magic. Don't think about it too much. So there we are. So comparing the GRRM and Buffyverse, some interesting answers to be had about who does magic better or worse. Thanks for listening.